Camp counselors of Reddit, what is the most NSFW thing you've seen happen at camp? Saw a girl give a guy a hand job under a towel. On the bus. On the bus filled with children. On the bus filled with children going to a Christian camp. This actually happened earlier today. I work at a summer day camp at a local park with kids in kindergarten age group. Interesting gross things happen almost every day with kids at that age. But today's event took the cake. Basically, the 6-year-old boy found a dead bird in the grass and decided it would be fun to pick it up and smear the blood and guts all over his hands and arms. After doing that, he started chasing around other campers to try to share his bird entrails on them. I had the pleasure of catching the gore-covered kid, ripping the bird's ravaged carcass out of his hands, and spending half an hour in the bathroom getting him and myself cleaned up. When I asked him why the heck he picked up a dead animal, he said that he thought it was something awesome to do. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Just goes to show that comments about 6-year-olds savaging animals are totally the way to go. My favorite was a 13-year-old boy at camp out. Both his hands were in his sleeping bag and he was clearly masturbating. His counselor called a hand check where you have to display both hands in the air. He only raised one hand. The counselor asked for both hands and he replied, "Give me 4 minutes." Counselors having a threesome in an empty cabin next to the bathrooms. Finally a chance to post this. One year I was working a regular camp and had a lead counselor run over to another counselor and I to say, "Look in the first stall of the boys' bathroom." We left our kids with our age group's female counselors and ran. By the time we made it, a crowd of counselors had formed around the toilet. Contained inside was by far the mightiest, largest turd I have ever seen in my life. Easily a diameter of 3 inches and long enough to be far down into the toilet while also freewheeling out of the surface of the water. No campers were told about this. A few days later a camper asked me if we were running to the bathroom the other day because of a giant piece of poop and claimed to be the conjurer of it. I was mortified. I was a camp counselor a few years ago at a camp for foster kids. One week a counselor caught a camper, M15, in bed with another camper, F14. The room they were in was tiny, and the 4 other girls in the bunks were awake and cheering them on. They were loud enough to wake the counselor, who pulled the male camper out of bed. The guy had a Ziploc bag around his D, held in place by a rubber band. I was both impressed at their dedication to trying to have sapphics, and appalled at how terribly they went about it. I was working at a young life camp in Colorado probably 12 years ago. I think it was the first day right around dinner time and a girl just up and died. Her heart just stopped. She was sitting talking with her friends and fell over. It was incredibly intense and very sad for a lot of people and tons of people were there to witness it. It's not the most scandalous of camp stories, but it was certainly pretty ducked up and put a weird vibe on the rest of the week. I had 2 twin brothers that were very handsy with each other. One day one of them came to me crying because his brother had bit his tongue after he tried kissing him. There was this Asian kid named Kevin who went to the bathroom to take a it, but there was pee on the toilet seat, so he started to cry and then took a it on the floor because he really had to go. There were these 2 kids, which we nicknamed Poo Poo Picasso and Gandhi. Both were in my friend's cabin, which was year 2 campers. So the kids were just out of 3rd grade. So I guess they were around 8 or 9 years old. Anyway, Poo Poo Picasso would smear his it. He'd defecate inside of his trunk and left it there for a day before my friend noticed the smell. He wrote on the walls of the bathrooms with his own feces. It was disgusting. Now Gandhi didn't want to be at summer camp, despite it being a total blast. He would itch and complain and ask to call home, which he wasn't allowed to do unless it was a rather serious situation. Fine, we deal with this sometimes. But what we weren't expecting was for him to go on a hunger strike. That's right, a hunger strike. He just would refuse to eat for several meals. He would break and eat a ton of snacks during our afternoon refreshment period when he thought we wouldn't notice. What made Gandhi really special is that he learned how to vomit on command. To do so he would drink insane amounts of water. Then when we would ask him to do something he didn't want to do, he would just vomit everywhere. It was nasty. But at the same time, typing this out is making me giggle. Eventually the 2 kids got over it, I think. I was a day camp counselor during the summers in high school. I watched another counselor eat herself out after smoking by the gully. My 16-year-old self couldn't look away. Also, generally, the counselors are ducking like rabbits. Had 6-year-old campers at a day camp. After swimming, found 2 of them facing each other naked in the locker room. They were standing there, hitting each other's erect D's and making the boing boing sounds. I was a counselor at a day camp. We took kids to the zoo. A kid shoved his thumb fully inside a petting zoo goat's butt. I asked him why and he just shrugged, looking at me like I'm the idiot. I felt bad for the goat, but it was still standing next to him, so maybe it was into it. After reading about all the camp counselors having sex with each other, I've decided I'm gonna be a camp counselor. Camper who spoke no English got a nasty head wound from a nail on the cabin rafters that he died into. Also so much counselor sex. I work in a building that hosts a camp for people with autism and other mental handicaps. A guy with something was really attached to his counselor, a girl. He really liked her and asked her out almost every hour of the week. She finally said no, I have a boyfriend or something along those lines. He got really mad and stripped down and freaked out. He peed and pooped all over the floor, and other counselors were trying to calm him down. He ran over to a fire extinguisher box and smashed his head into the glass. He had big chunks of glass in his face and forehead, bleeding everywhere. We were told as building managers to stay clear of the floor he was on. They would clean it all up. It was odd. Another story, when he left the building we also found a sort of poop shrine. He would poop in the closet and then mold underwear to it. He must have used a whole can of Febreze on the thing a day because we never knew about it. Couldn't smell anything. Andre is not a happy camper. In high school I was a counselor at a community outdoor camp where a lot of the kids who attended were there just because their parents needed to put them somewhere. These kids were typically 8-12 years old. We would have to take the kids on hikes around the property where we'd see a bunch of uninteresting animals, hang out by a pond or creek, then head back to the main center where some animal expert would bring in a snake or owl to give the children some excitement each day. One week we got these 2 little dudes who hated everything about the camp from the start, but they hated each other more than Samuel Jackson hates snakes on a plane. They were constantly finding creative ways to piss each other off throughout the week. On the last day of camp we had just finished a hike and stopped by a creek where everyone could rest and look for frogs or throw mud into the woods. Behind me I hear one of the 2 call the other a itch, after which I slowly turned around to see what the other one would do. The accused itch had picked up a half cinder block size rock and was bringing over his head so he could smash the back of the accuser's head in with it. Fortunately I was close enough to where I could grab the rock before it came down on the other kid's unsuspecting head. TLDR. Stopped a 12-year-old from smashing another 12-year-old's head in with a rock the size of a 12-year-old's head. I saw one of the campers using hedge trimmers without the proper gloves. I gave him the gloves, and then his gardening service activity became SFW. I was a camp counselor years ago, and while I don't recall really seeing anything NSFW with the kids, I can tell you almost everything I saw with the counselors was NSFW. I couldn't walk into a room without seeing people ducking in tents, on top of the staff washing machines, in the general store. Parents, if you send your kids to camp, just remember, literally the only thing those counselors are thinking about is ducking each other. I worked at a sleepaway Girl Scout camp with all female counselors and staff where a solid 60% were lesbian. There was a strictly enforced no more ducking in the bushes rule, because so many counselors would go at it anywhere they could find it. Never sending my kids to camp, and I should have been a camp counselor when I was in high school. I worked at an 8-week sleepaway camp in the Northeast and was working in a bunk of 7 and 8-year-olds. As the summer went along we lost a few counselors due to the fact our campers were the devil's spawn and only 6 or 7 years old. So us remaining counselors were spread thin. And one day in the span of 10 minutes when we didn't have a counselor in the bunk, I'm walking back and all the kids are running out of the bunk screaming about how one of the campers, M6, put his D in another kid's mouth. M7. This is an all boys camp too. And when the camper was later asked why he let the other kid put his D in his mouth, the kid's response was because they dared me to after long lashings from the director and owners and what I assume was some long talks with the kid's parents. It was all swept under the rug and forgotten. TLDR. A camper put his D in another male camper's mouth. I'm late to this so this probably won't be seen. Camper, 13. Carves giant D out of wood. Camper proceeds to run around laughing holding it on his crotch and such. Counselor laying on a bunk asks to see it. Still lying down. Counselor holds wooden D vertical on crotch. Envy detected. Camper runs up and sits on the wooden D while it's being held by the counselor. I put it in the incinerator. I worked as a counselor at a camp for adults with disabilities. All my campers were in their 20s, late 30s. One night one of my campers was masturbating loudly and furiously. Because we all slept in one giant room. Her noises were waking everyone up. It was so distracting that I had to give her the masturbation chat the next day and also explain it to all my campers privately. Boy, what a fun day that was. I have been waiting my whole life for this post. So at the beginning of summer camp, many children are shy, anxious, nervous etc. Other just flat out don't want to be there. One of those people happens to be the phantometer. So first week of camp, one of the counselors that I work with was doing a bathroom check. Just for overall cleanliness of the site. They found that someone was put painting on the bathroom stalls. Disgusting but not unheard of. Later that week, it happens again. Only this time there is a clear message. Painted and bolded on the bathroom wall was I want freedom. The phantometer doesn't know how to spell but you get the idea. The situation develops further the following week. Field trip. Rather large playground that has a tall slide structure. When I say tall, this thing is bigger than a house. At the top of it there is an area where people wait in line to go on these giant slides. As one counselor goes up to watch his children go down said slides, he finds a glorious turd at the top of the slide. Now the phantometer would not have gotten away with taking it at the top of the slide. Way too much traffic up there. My theory. They took the id elsewhere in the park and then walked there it up to the top to be found. Since then there has been more cave paintings on the bathroom walls but no further turds. We'll post updates if anyone gives a duck. This story needs to be heard. I don't care how buried IT gets. Ex-counselor here. Our camp has a thing where one night all the people who had been there for 3 years go out and do crazy it in the fields by the camp. Needless to say I saw a lot of breasts. But other than that and smoking weed nothing really big happened. Apparently in years before some of the abandoned cabins were used during that night for sex parties with lots of alcohol involved. This was back in like the 1990s where I guess the upper staff were a lot more lenient. I worked at the camp in 2010 so I guess I missed the really interesting stuff. It was interesting to bring up the topic to my boss who worked at the camp as a counselor at that time and see him get all red-faced and not know what I was talking about. TLDR. A wild night once a year used to a sex party but not we just flash each other and smoke. Day 1 at camp. We jumped out of the bus and ran around because we were so excited. My friend ran behind the bus and the bus ran him over. He was rushed off by ambulance. I didn't see him for another 3 months. Edit spelling. I sound like a 12-year in those few sentences. I'm 42. Walking in on 2 15-year-old girls having the worst smelling lesbian sex. It stunk up the whole dorm all night. We had to open all the windows. Everyone knew. I used to work at a Cub Scout summer camp and one summer we had a staff member named Mark. Mark was your general super douche boy scout, not saying all scouts are douches but there are certainly some gigantic ones, and completely overconfident in himself. So one day Mark was telling all of us, the staff, about how his D is 10 inches soft and not even jokingly he was being very serious. So clearly we all knew he was bulleting so that night a few of the other staff spray painted a giant D on the side of his tent along with the quote 10 inches soft. The best part was the paint didn't show up unless it was dark and then it glowed. So whenever you walked up to the tent site at night you could see a giant glowing D with 10 inches soft quoted underneath. The best part was none of the management knew until the next summer when we were setting up tents for the summer. And when the ranger saw it he got so angry and offended and started talking about how all kids nowadays are Satan. I was a counselor for a teen group. 13-16-year-old boys and girls. We took the group of about 25 on a camping trip to Oklahoma. Since most of the kids came from pretty well-to-do families and the IMCA where we worked had plenty of money we were staying in pretty swanky cabins. One large living room downstairs and 2 large loft style rooms upstairs. Of course we separated the girls on one side, boys to the other and counselors in between. One of the female counselors noticed some dust on the floor of the shower one night and looked up to see a hole in the ceiling. The boys had taken the coat hooks out of the wall and used that to drill holes down into the shower so they could watch the girls. They had even gone so far as to work out shifts and an elaborate signal system when counselors were nearby. They were able to keep it up for 2 nights before anyone noticed. Edit. We had to notify all of the parents. Very awkward conversations. Hey Sulu, about 20 teenage boys may have seen your daughter naked. Myself and the other counselors in training stayed over in the food meeting hall place one night with one of the counselors. Truth or dare started happening. Someone truthed this French exchange student chick, what's the farthest you've ever gone with someone? In broken English. She said something along the lines of, one time my cousin and I were together and he put his balls on me, motion to her crotch, and we went like this, humping motion. Silence. Lots of worried looks exchanged. Next person's turn. Finally something I can actually weigh in on. I work at a day camp for kids ages 4-13. I was with a group of about 10 kids, all 8 or 9 years old. One day before pool time, one kid walked into the bathroom, got buck-ass naked, then started crying because he had lost his bathing suit. I went in trying to defuse the situation and he bolted. He ran around at top speed screaming and crying, flailing his arms all over the place. Do you know how illegal it looks for a 16-year-old boy to chase a nude 8-year-old? Well, I eventually caught the kid and brought him back to the bathroom. When I asked him what his bathing suit looked like, he pulled a bathing suit out and said it looks like this. OHHH. A third-acker had his bathing suit 6 feet from him the entire time. Was checking rooms after everyone was supposed to have moved out. Found a 12-year-old ducking another 12-year-old male and coming just as I opened the door. They didn't hear me, so I waited a few minutes, then knocked on the door and opened it to find 2 innocent kids packing their bags. They apologized for being slow to get out of their room. NSFW in that I should have never been told at work. I'm a camp director and we had a kiddo who was at camp for the first time. Roughly 10 years old. Mum gave us a heads up that dad's health was failing and she wanted her son to have a break and recoup. But we also might have some behavioral issues. Great. No problem. We'll take great care of him. She calls Wednesday to tell me dad died the night before. I extend my condolences and state that I'll quietly get her son packed, but not say anything to him. She says, no, I'm going to leave him there for now. I want him to have 2 more days of joy before I break his little heart. It was the longest 2 days of my life. Knowing this kid's world was going to shatter Friday afternoon, I had to tell a few other staff so that we could be absolutely sure he had the best 2 days. It just sucked so bad for the adults. Obviously sucked worse for the child. But you know what I mean. I was a counselor at a boys camp. One day, a counselor walked into his cabin to see most of the campers, all about 13 years old, jacking it with lacrosse gloves and cueing on other campers' pillows. Yep. I was a sit at a Boy Scout camp and one day another guy and I go look in the staff showers and see someone has taken a mighty it. It must have been at least 3-4 because this pile is massive. About a foot in diameter. And while we were showering nearby, we kept hearing other counselors come by, look at the it and start screaming. I was working as a counselor at an overnight camp and I saw 2 boys, about 10 years old, fighting and then walk inside a cabin to settle their argument. I followed them in just in time to see them start fighting. It ended with the one kid pulling off 3/4 of the other kid's earlobe, which I had to scoop up and put in a plastic bag with some ice before driving him to the hospital. They were fighting about who was a better musician, Eminem or Bob Marley. Back in 1979 a 15F was sent to Christian camp by her Christian parents to try set her on a better path. At the camp she met the camp counselor 20M and hit it off. 9 months later my brother was born. I was 18 and training to be a camp counselor. I would do day-to-day work around the camp to help everyone out and one day I went to the laundry room to drop off a load of dirty sleeping bags where there were 3 girls from my group, around 14 years old, going to town on each other. Full on lesbian 3-way. Nope, the duck out of the laundry room. This is probably not going to be noticed now, but a kid pretended to be possessed by Hitler and then attacked me because I'm Jewish. Also, while he was possessed by Hitler, he yelled, "WHO killed Emmy," to which somebody in the crowded cabin responded, "You killed yourself, Dustin." We had a 9-year-old camper who snuck out of her tent in the night and headed into another tent where she straddled another camper who was sleeping. She apparently stared at the sleeping camper until her heavy breathing woke the sleeping one up. The startled camper screamed and woke her tent mates, all of whom witnessed that the creepy camper leaned down to her victim, nose to nose, and said that she was going to murder the victim and write the victim's obituary with her own blood. I have no idea how serious creepy camper was, because the tent mates all restrained her pretty much immediately. I can't imagine how the phone calls between the camp director and first the creepy camper's parents, then CPS, and I was an overseas counselor, England, working at a Jewish camp up in the hills outside Montreal. One day, after the campers' shower time, they returned to the bunk to dry off, always a time in which I and the other staff would avoid purely due to the weirdness that would ensue. It was usually chaos. I'm talking underpant head wrestling coupled with naked 5 frog splashes. Anyway, one day during the final session of a 3-month summer, the post-shower bunk seemed a bit quiet. I walk in to see all but 3 of the 12 campers stood in a line behind 2 other campers. Not too unusual, they always played dumb games. This one was perhaps a little different, though. They were effectively playing, and they're often known by the staff as the deep throat game. Each kid would take a turn deep throating one older child. Duck knows what the winner got. I dread to think. Needless to say, head staff were told, and parents informed. TLDR, kids suck at getting changed after showers. This story takes place at an academic camp help on university grounds and has 2 parts. Part 1 was fairly mundane, as NSFW camp stories go. There we were, walking by the dorms after lights out to make sure no one was trying to sneak out, when we spy a flashing light in the window of the attic of boys' dorm. We found our way up there and discovered that one of the campers had both A. brought a portable strobe light with him to camp and B. felt it was a good idea to deploy said strobe while getting it on with a fellow camper. It was really jarring. We separated them and made plans to call their parents in the morning. The second part of the story is more unique, I hope. The guy with the strobe immediately told his various dorm mates why he had been busted, and by dawn everyone in both dorms had heard of his sexual exploits. This upset his young paramour. Apparently, she broke into a storage room looking for a weapon and found a large fork used for turning sausages on the barbecue, which she took along with a pair of oven mitts. Giant pointy tines was apparently not good enough for her, so she borrowed all of the other girls' curling irons, clipped them to the fork, heated it up, and stabbed him in the stomach with it. Worked at a Cub Scout camp, hooked up with another staff member and dated for a few weeks until the girl left me for another female staff member. That went on for the rest of camp. They broke up afterwards, and now that second girl, the one I didn't date at camp, is my wife. Not NSFW but definitely awesome. I was on another counselor's porch that was filled with 2nd graders who wouldn't shut up after lights out. The counselor ran in and told the 2nd graders a hairy clitoris monster was living in the woods and would eat them if they didn't shut up. They started crying lol. Camp counselor for a bunch of 12-year-olds a couple years back, and Tyson, the horny little duck, jerked off every night. We all stayed in big teepees and I'd always hear that kid wank away every night. Just the subtle sound of movement and then it would gradually die after a few minutes. I don't know if he brought a roll of toilet paper for his frequent fat tickets, if he used his sleeping bag as little Tyson cemetery, or if Tyson was shooting blanks, but I could not sleep to the sound of that kid beating away every night. Just today some girl scratched her butt, smelled the finger, made her friend next to her smell it, then proceed to pick her nose with the same finger. In the camp I used to work at, we'd always used to get a couple of troubled kids. It was an overnight camp, so the female campers had cabins designated rooms on the 1st floor, and the male campers on the 2nd floor. One night, I went to check on my campers before their set bedtime to make sure everything was alright. I heard yelling from the room above us, although I couldn't quite fathom what was happening. I had just assumed that it was just another typical camper counselor argument because a camper refuses to go to sleep. Yeah. Turns out one of the campers had turned one of those wire hangers into some sort of brass knuckles rings and started threatening his counselors with it because he was lectured for being disruptive. We had a camp store. At the beginning of the session your parents would put in like $40 so you could buy little things or ice cream if you wanted. However, everyone always ran out. Girls started prostituting themselves for store goods. A nipple peek for an ice cream. A butt grab for 2 king-size candy bars. A kiss for sodas. It escalated. It was awesome. One day on the bus back to town with a kid Sarah from Ville, one 15-year-old girl decided it would be a grand old time to help a male counselor grease his gherkin. Needless to say he was asked to not return the following summer. She on the other hand was hired as a JC the next summer. So all of the senior counselors referred to her in private as Blowjob Bonnie. Edit. Read a bunch. Still miss camp.